The restaurant was full of soft light, the kind that made everything look a little more expensive than it really was. Chandeliers sparkled above the tables, and the air was filled with the quiet hum of voices mixed with the gentle clinking of glasses and cutlery. In one corner, a group of sharply dressed business people sat around a long table covered with white cloth. At the head of the table was Martin, a man in his late 30s who had spent years chasing one dream after another. Tonight, everything he had worked for was coming together. His palms were slightly damp, though he kept a calm face. The pen in his pocket seemed heavier than usual, because he knew that with one signature, his life could change forever. The other men at the table were older, seasoned executives who had signed deals bigger than this one before. Their suits were tailored, their watches glinted under the light, and their eyes showed the quiet confidence of people used to winning. They leaned back in their chairs as if they owned not just the restaurant but the city itself. For them, this $100 million deal was just another move on the chessboard of business. For Martin, it was everything. He tried to steady his breathing while flipping through the final pages of the agreement. His presentation had gone smoothly, his slides had been clear, his voice steady. He had worked for months to prepare, and he wanted to believe he had thought of everything. Still, a tiny knot of unease sat in his stomach. He ignored it and reminded himself that this was his chance to step into a new league. He wasn't just a small entrepreneur anymore. After tonight, he would be the man who closed a deal worth more than most people would ever see in a lifetime. Waiters moved in and out of the room, carrying plates of roasted fish, fresh bread, and bowls of steaming vegetables. They refilled wine glasses and made sure everything looked flawless. Among them was Alicia, a young black waitress with kind eyes and an energy that never seemed to fade, no matter how many hours she had worked. She had been at the restaurant for years, balancing shifts while caring for her younger siblings back home. Most nights, she stayed invisible to the powerful people who dined there. She was just someone who carried food and cleared plates. Tonight, however, fate had something else in store for her. As Alicia placed a basket of bread on the table, her eyes drifted for a moment to the open folder in front of Martin. Numbers and figures filled the page in neat lines, but something about them caught her attention. She didn't mean to stare, it was just a habit she had picked up. In high school, before she had to leave to take care of her family, she had been top of her class in math. Numbers had always made sense to her, the way music makes sense to some people. She could spot patterns quickly, and even now, after years away from books, that skill remained. Martin didn't notice her glance, but she noticed the way the formula on one page looked strange. It wasn't written the way she remembered learning it in school. It was small, just a detail hidden among the rows of calculations, but it stuck in her mind. She shook her head slightly and walked away, reminding herself that it wasn't her place. She was here to serve, not to get involved in million-dollar decisions. Still, the thought clung to her as she moved from table to table, smiling politely and making sure the guests were comfortable. At the main table, Martin felt his heart quicken as one of the executives, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes, leaned forward and said, "Well, Martin, if everything looks good to you, I think we're ready to sign." The words rang in Martin's ears like music, but also like a drum beat before battle. He nodded, forcing a confident smile. His pen was already in his hand, and he could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. Around him, the executives exchanged looks, ready to shake hands and move on to their next big project. Alicia returned with a tray of glasses. As she leaned forward to set them down, her eyes fell once again on that page. The same strange formula. She paused for only a second, her hands steady, her mind racing. She knew it wasn't right. She had seen enough equations in her school days to recognize when something didn't add up. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she bit her lip, unsure of what to do. Speaking up could cost her everything. The managers here didn't like when staff interfered. And what would these wealthy men think if a waitress tried to correct them? But as she looked at Martin's face, she saw something she recognized: nervousness hidden under a brave smile. He looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff, hoping the bridge he had built would hold. Alicia knew what it was like to put everything on the line. She knew what it was like to carry a family's future on your shoulders. Something inside her whispered that if she stayed silent, she might regret it forever. Martin picked up the pen, ready to sign. His hand hovered over the dotted line. The executives watched with quiet anticipation, their eyes gleaming. In that exact moment, Alicia leaned in ever so slightly, close enough that only he could hear, and in the softest whisper she said, "That's the wrong formula." The words were almost lost in the sounds of clinking glasses and distant music, but Martin heard them. His hand froze midair. He turned his head slightly, confusion flashing in his eyes. Alicia stood straight again, her face calm, as if nothing had happened. She moved away with the same steady grace as always, leaving Martin staring at the page with his heart racing faster than ever before. He blinked and looked back at the numbers. For a moment, everything blurred, but then the unease in his stomach grew sharper. He ran his finger down the formula she had glanced at, and suddenly the knot in his chest tightened. Something didn't feel right. The symbols, the structure, it was off. His throat went dry. Could it be? He wasn't sure, but the whisper echoed in his mind, "That's the wrong formula." The executives shifted in their seats, wondering why he hadn't signed yet. "Is there a problem?" one of them asked, his voice calm but with a hint of impatience. Martin forced a smile, but his mind was no longer calm. He looked once more at the figures, this time with a sharper eye. His world, which had felt so secure just moments before, now felt like it was balancing on the edge of a knife. And so, in a restaurant filled with glittering light and the quiet confidence of men who believed they had the upper hand, a single whisper from a waitress had changed everything. Martin sat frozen for a moment after the waitress's whisper, but he didn't let anyone notice his sudden doubt. He gave a small smile and leaned back in his chair, pretending to adjust his pen. The executives around the table didn't see the shift in his expression, but inside his chest, his heart was racing like a drum. He couldn't shake the sound of her voice. It was soft, almost hesitant, yet it carried a weight that made him question everything. He forced himself to glance at the page again, his eyes sliding over the numbers. On the surface, it looked fine, neat, and professional, like something his accountants had double-checked 100 times. But the whisper made his stomach twist. The older man across the table raised his glass, smiling in victory already. "Martin," he said in a deep voice, "I hope you're ready to step into the big leagues. This is history in the making." Martin nodded slowly, but his fingers pressed against the paper with a nervous tension. He thought back to the months of preparation, the endless nights he had stayed awake running numbers again and again, pushing himself until his eyes blurred. He had trusted his team, trusted the formulas, trusted that everything was solid. But what if it wasn't? What if a single mistake had slipped through, hidden under the weight of so many calculations? His throat felt dry, so he reached for the glass of water near him. The waitress's words replayed in his head, echoing louder each time, "That's the wrong formula." How could she have known? She wasn't part of the meeting, wasn't supposed to understand the deal. And yet, the certainty in her tone left him shaken. While Martin tried to steady his thoughts, Alicia was back near the kitchen, pretending to polish silverware. Her hands moved, but her mind was far away, circling around the decision she had just made. She had broken one of the unspoken rules of her job: never interfere. She could lose her position if anyone found out. Her manager would scold her, the customers might complain, and she couldn't afford to be without work. But still, she couldn't regret what she had done. She had seen something wrong, and she had spoken. Whether Martin believed her or not, at least she had tried. Martin turned another page, pretending to review the details for the benefit of the others at the table. He could feel their eyes on him, expecting him to move forward. His pen tapped softly against the folder, the sound almost hidden beneath the hum of the restaurant. Inside, his mind was racing. If the formula was wrong, what did that mean for the deal? Was he giving away more than he realized? Was he about to trap his company in an agreement that would drain it dry? He thought back to the early days of his business, when he had nothing but an idea and a small desk in a borrowed office. He remembered the nights he had slept on that desk, refusing to quit even when every door seemed closed. He had fought too hard to lose everything because of a careless mistake now. One of the executives leaned forward, his voice sharp with impatience. "Is there a delay, Martin? You've had months to prepare for this. If you're unsure, maybe you're not ready." The word stung, but Martin forced a polite smile. "Just being thorough," he replied. "When we're dealing with numbers like these, you can't be too careful." The men chuckled, but it was a laughter filled with arrogance, as if they believed they had already won. They leaned back again, sipping their wine, unconcerned. Martin's pulse hammered in his ears. He turned the pages back once more, his eyes narrowing on the figures that Alicia had noticed. He tried to walk through the calculation step by step in his head, the way he had done so many times before. And then, slowly, unease crept into his chest like a spreading shadow. There it was. A detail so small, so easy to miss, yet dangerous enough to change everything. The formula for calculating future profits had been written incorrectly. It shifted the balance of the deal away from him and toward them. If he signed as it was, the contract would tie him down to terms that could bleed his company of millions over the next few years. He felt his stomach drop. The waitress had been right. Martin leaned back, covering his shock with a calm expression. He couldn't let them see the storm inside him. If they realized he had just discovered the mistake, they might press harder, sensing his vulnerability. He needed time, needed to think, needed to find a way to turn this around without showing weakness. Meanwhile, in the quiet corner near the kitchen, Alicia peeked out. She couldn't read Martin's face from here, but she wondered if he had heard her, if he would take her whisper seriously. A part of her wished she could vanish, to avoid whatever consequences might follow. Yet another part of her hoped he would listen, because she had seen in his eyes something deeper than just business. She had seen a man who carried the weight of more than just money. Back at the table, Martin cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but quieter than before we proceed, I'd like to review one section again. Just to make sure there are no misunderstandings." The executives exchanged glances. One of them sighed dramatically, but none objected. Martin's hand tightened on the folder as he flipped back to the dangerous formula. He could almost feel the waitress's presence in the air, the whisper guiding him. He realized how close he had come to disaster, how a single signature could have destroyed years of effort. For the next few minutes, Martin kept the conversation light, asking harmless questions while his mind worked furiously. He knew he needed a plan. If he revealed the mistake too soon, they might push him into a corner. But if he stayed silent, he risked being trapped forever. He thought about the waitress again, Alicia, though he didn't yet know her name and how she had noticed what his entire team of professionals had missed. The thought gave him a strange sense of comfort, as if fate itself had placed her in his path. The atmosphere at the table remained polished and polite, but under the surface, the balance had shifted. The executives thought they were minutes away from victory, while Martin quietly fought to keep his future alive. He smiled, he nodded, he listened to their small talk about stocks and markets, but inside he was building a new strategy. The waitress's whisper had planted doubt, but it had also given him a second chance. And second chances were not something Martin ever wasted. The night moved forward, dishes came and went, laughter rose and fell, but Martin's thoughts never strayed far from that single page of numbers. He kept his calm mask on, but inside, he promised himself one thing: before this night was over, the deal would not end the way the men across the table expected. Martin sat at the table with a steady expression, but inside, his mind was anything but calm. He had just confirmed the truth of the whisper that had reached his ears a few minutes earlier. The formula was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but dangerously wrong. Signing this contract as it was would have trapped him in an agreement that would eat away at his company piece by piece, until nothing was left but a hollow name. He swallowed hard and tried not to let his panic show. The men across from him were sharp. If they sensed his worry, they would circle like sharks smelling blood in the water. He forced himself to smile as another plate was cleared away, nodding politely at a joke one of the older executives told. They laughed easily, as though the outcome was already written, as if Martin's signature was a formality. None of them realized that Martin had seen the truth. None of them knew that the deal had already shifted, not in their favor, but in his. All because of a single whisper from a waitress no one else had even noticed. Martin tapped his pen lightly against the folder, trying to think. He couldn't just announce the error. That would give away his hand. He needed to move carefully, to turn this discovery into an advantage rather than a weakness. But how? His brain raced, searching through years of experience, remembering negotiations from the past, remembering mistakes he had made when he was young and eager. He couldn't afford eagerness tonight. He had to be patient, clever, and calm. The silver-haired man at the table leaned forward, resting his elbows on the cloth. "Martin," he said smoothly, "we don't want to waste time. You've impressed us with your presentation. You've shown courage, stepping into an arena like this. But it's time to close. Are you ready?" Martin gave a small smile. "I appreciate your patience," he said. "But before I sign, I want to walk through one last section. Humor me, it will only take a moment." The executives exchanged glances again, some annoyed, some curious. They had expected him to be grateful, maybe even desperate, for their approval. Instead, he sat calmly, holding the pen but refusing to move it. The man sighed. "Fine. Which section?" Martin turned the folder back to the page with the formula, the one the waitress had warned him about. He laid it flat on the table, his fingers steady even though his heart pounded. "This one," he said softly. "I want to be sure we're all on the same page about how this is being calculated." One of the younger executives adjusted his glasses and leaned over the page. "It's straightforward," he said. "Projected profit margins, simple calculation. Nothing unusual." Martin nodded. "Perhaps," he said. "But humor me. Walk me through it, step by step." The man blinked at him, surprised at the request. "Still," he began to explain, pointing at the symbols and numbers. Martin listened closely, watching their faces more than the paper. He wanted to see their confidence, to measure whether they truly believed the numbers were correct. As the man explained, Martin caught the smallest flicker in his expression, a hesitation, a stumble as he moved past the exact part where the formula was flawed. There it was. Confirmation. They knew. Martin's pulse quickened. The deal had been structured in their favor intentionally. The mistake wasn't an accident at all. It was a trap. If not for the waitress's whisper, he would have walked straight into it. The realization burned in his chest, but he kept his face calm. He nodded slowly. "I see. Interesting approach." His tone was neutral, giving away nothing. He leaned back, folding his hands together, and looked at them with a faint smile. "Gentlemen, I'll need a moment to think." They shifted uncomfortably. One of them frowned. "What's to think about? We've been negotiating for months. You wanted this deal. Here it is." "Yes," Martin said softly. "But 100 million is a lot of money. And mistakes in numbers can be costly. I've learned that the hard way before." I'd rather be careful now than regretful later. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Martin's calmness unsettled them. He wasn't supposed to act like this. He was supposed to sign eagerly, blinded by the size of the number. Instead, he was making them wait, making them wonder what he had noticed. Meanwhile, Alicia moved quietly in the background, collecting empty glasses. Her eyes drifted toward the table, and for just a second, Martin's gaze met hers. He gave the smallest nod, almost invisible to anyone else. She looked down quickly, her heart pounding. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she could sense that her whisper had mattered. Back at the table, the executives began to grow impatient. The silver-haired man leaned forward again. Martin, hesitation kills opportunities. If you walk away tonight, we may not come back to the table. Martin smiled faintly. Then I suppose I'll have to be sure before I sign, won't I? Silence fell for a moment. The air grew thick. The older man's eyes narrowed, searching Martin's face for clues. He saw none. Martin had perfected his mask, calm and unreadable. Inside, though, Martin's thoughts were racing faster than ever. He thought of his employees, the men and women who depended on him. He thought of the sacrifices he had made, the nights he had gone without sleep, the risks he had taken. This deal wasn't just about money, it was about their future too. He couldn't let them down by making a mistake now. At last, Martin set the pen down and folded the folder closed. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I think we should pause here. I want to review these numbers more carefully before I commit." Shock flashed across their faces. They hadn't expected him to refuse, not after coming so far. One of them barked out a laugh. "You're making a mistake. Deals like this don't wait. If you walk away now, you'll lose everything." Martin looked at him steadily. "I'd rather lose a deal than sign the wrong one." The words carried a quiet strength, stronger than any shout. For the first time that night, the executives shifted uneasily, as if the ground beneath them had tilted. Martin no longer looked like a desperate man seeking approval. He looked like someone who had seen through their game. The meeting ended with tense handshakes and polite words that hid frustration. The executives left, their polished shoes clicking on the restaurant floor, their faces tight with anger. Martin sat alone for a long moment after they were gone, staring at the closed folder. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from relief. He had been seconds away from disaster. As he rose to leave, he glanced once more at the waitress. She stood near the kitchen, pretending to busy herself with dishes. Their eyes met again, and this time Martin gave her a look filled with gratitude. She had saved him, though she didn't yet realize how much. Martin walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, his mind buzzing. He didn't have the deal yet, but he still had his company, and he had something more valuable than the illusion of quick success. He had the truth. And he had been given it by the quiet courage of someone no one else had seen. The night after the tense dinner, Martin could not sleep. He sat at his desk at home with the contract spread out in front of him, a cup of coffee gone cold at his side. The city outside was quiet, only the hum of distant traffic breaking the silence. His pen tapped rhythmically on the wood as he went over the numbers again and again. The waitress's whisper had given him the courage to stop the signing, but now the real battle had begun. He saw the trap clearly now. The formula had been twisted in such a way that his company would shoulder the greater risk, while the executives on the other side of the deal stood to profit no matter what happened. It was clever, almost brilliant in its deception. If he had signed, his dream of expansion would have turned into a nightmare. The thought made his chest tighten. He had been seconds away from walking into it. But now that he had caught it, the tables could turn. He had information they didn't know he possessed. And information, in business, was power. The next morning, he called his financial advisor and a trusted accountant into his office. Together, they pored over the documents. The advisor, a careful man with years of experience, whistled softly when he saw the formula. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "They set it up this way on purpose. If you'd signed last night, you would have been bleeding money for years." Martin nodded grimly. "I figured as much." "What do you want to do?" the accountant asked. Martin leaned back, his eyes sharp. "We're not walking away. We're going back in. But this time, we're not playing defense. This time, we're going to use it to our advantage." Over the next few days, Martin and his small team worked tirelessly. They recalculated everything, building a version of the deal that favored his company instead. They studied the other side's weaknesses, finding the cracks in their confidence. Martin's plan was simple: he would confront them with the truth, but not in anger. He would use their own mistake, the formula they thought was hidden, as the key to gaining leverage. When the executives called him back, expecting him to beg for another chance, Martin surprised them. He arrived at their glass office tower in a crisp suit, carrying the same folder but with new numbers tucked inside. His steps were calm, steady, as he walked into the grand meeting room where they waited. The silver-haired leader greeted him with a thin smile. "Martin," he said smoothly, "I trust you've had time to reconsider. Deals like this don't stay on the table forever." Martin shook his hand firmly. "You're right," he said. "They don't. Which is why I've come prepared." The men settled back into their seats, expecting a plea, expecting nervousness. Instead, Martin opened his folder and laid out the corrected numbers in front of them. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "I reviewed everything carefully after our dinner. And I noticed something. A small detail, but one that changes the picture entirely." The younger executive adjusted his glasses, trying to appear calm. "And what detail is that?" Martin pointed to the formula. "This one. The way it's written skews the margins in your favor. Clever, but not correct. If I had signed, my company would have carried the burden while yours enjoyed guaranteed returns. That might have worked if I hadn't caught it. But now, we have to renegotiate. On my terms." The room went still. The executives exchanged sharp glances, their polished masks slipping for just a moment. They hadn't expected him to notice, and certainly not to confront them so directly. The silver-haired man's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing us of deception?" Martin smiled faintly. "I'm not accusing. I'm simply pointing out facts. Facts don't lie. Numbers don't lie. And neither do corrected formulas." He slid his new pages across the table. "This is what the deal should look like." They picked up the sheets, scanning them quickly. Their faces darkened. The new terms flipped the balance. Instead of draining Martin's company, the corrected agreement gave him stronger ground, better protections, and fairer profit shares. They realized, too late, that the power had shifted. For several minutes, no one spoke. Then the younger man cleared his throat. "These numbers are unacceptable." Martin leaned forward, his eyes steady. "They're accurate. You can accept them, or we walk away. But understand this: if I walk, I won't walk quietly. I'll make sure everyone in the industry knows how this contract was written." The words landed like a hammer. In the world of business, reputation was everything. If it became known that these executives had tried to slip a trap into a deal, their future negotiations would suffer. They could not afford that. The silver-haired man glared at Martin, but he saw the strength in his eyes, the calm determination. This wasn't the eager young entrepreneur they had expected to manipulate. This was a man who had found his footing, who would not be tricked again. Finally, the older man exhaled slowly. "Very well," he said. "Let's talk about your terms." The rest of the meeting stretched on for hours. Voices rose, tempers flared, but Martin never wavered. Each time they tried to push back, he calmly returned to the corrected numbers. Each time they tried to intimidate him, he reminded them of the risk to their reputation. Bit by bit, the balance shifted until, at last, they agreed. The contract was rewritten, signed under new terms that favored Martin, terms that would secure his company's future rather than endanger it. When Martin walked out of the building that evening, the sun was setting across the skyline. His heart pounded with the weight of what had just happened. He had gone from nearly losing everything to turning the entire situation around. He knew, deep down, that without that one whisper from the waitress, none of this would have been possible. He paused outside, watching the traffic pass, feeling the cool air against his face. His life had changed in the space of a few days. The deal was his, but more importantly, he had learned something he would never forget: even the smallest voice could alter the course of millions. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. He still had to find the young woman who had saved him with just a few words. The deal was signed under the new terms, and Martin walked away with more than a victory. He walked away with his company safe, his team's future secured, and his own reputation stronger than ever. Overnight, news spread quietly among industry circles about the bold entrepreneur who had stood up to a group of powerful executives and turned the deal in his favor. People admired his courage, but no one outside the room knew the real truth: that the turning point had come not from Martin's brilliance alone, but from a quiet whisper of a waitress who had noticed what others overlooked. Martin couldn't forget her. Every time he thought back to that dinner, he remembered the sound of her voice, soft yet firm, carrying a warning that saved him from disaster. He thought about how easily he could have ignored her, brushing it off as nonsense. But he hadn't. Something in her tone, something in her eyes, had carried weight. And because of that, everything had changed. Days later, after the deal was settled, Martin returned to the restaurant. He walked in not as a nervous businessman but as a man with confidence, though his heart carried a strange kind of anticipation. He asked the manager if the waitress named Alicia was working that evening. The manager frowned, surprised. "She is," he said, "but why do you ask?" Martin simply smiled. "Because I owe her more than you can imagine." When Alicia came out from the back, she was carrying a tray of glasses. She nearly dropped them when she saw him sitting at one of the corner tables. He was dressed neatly, but not as formally as before. This time, he wasn't surrounded by executives or papers. He was just himself. Their eyes met, and she hesitated, unsure if she should approach. Finally, she walked over. "Good evening, sir," she said softly. Martin smiled warmly. "Please, sit for a moment. I asked for you." Her eyes widened. "I'm not supposed to sit with guests." "I'll make sure you don't get in trouble," Martin replied gently. "Just for a minute." She sat down hesitantly, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Martin leaned forward, his voice filled with sincerity. "You saved me that night. You probably don't realize how much. That one whisper stopped me from making the worst mistake of my career. Because of you, the deal was corrected, and my company has a future. I owe you everything." Alicia blinked, surprised. She had wondered if he'd even heard her, let alone taken her seriously. She had convinced herself that maybe her words hadn't mattered. But now, hearing him say this, her throat tightened. "I didn't mean to interfere," she said quietly. I saw it, and I thought it wasn't right. I couldn't stay silent." "That's exactly why it mattered," Martin said firmly. "You had the courage to speak, even though it wasn't your place, even though it could have cost you. That kind of courage is rare. And intelligence too. Not many people could have spotted that formula at a glance." She looked down, a shy smile tugging at her lips. I used to be good at math, she admitted. I had dreams of studying further, maybe becoming an accountant. But life didn't work out that way. My family needed me, so I started working here. Martin's heart ached at her words. He saw not just a waitress, but a woman with sharp potential who had been forced to set aside her own dreams. He thought about how many people in the world never got noticed, never got the chance they deserved. And he knew in that moment that he couldn't let her talent go unseen. Alicia, he said softly, I want to offer you a position at my company. Not charity, not a favor. A real position where your skills will matter. You have an eye for detail, and you're clearly smarter than most people I've worked with. I'd be lucky to have you on my team. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she thought he was joking. Me, she whispered. Yes, you, Martin said with a smile. You're the reason I'm still standing. And I believe you can do far more than carry trays in this place. Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Martin replied simply. For a long moment, Alicia sat in silence, her heart pounding. She thought of her family, of the years she had worked long hours without recognition. She thought of the sacrifices she had made and the dreams she had tucked away. And now, sitting across from the man whose life she had unknowingly changed, she realized this was her chance to step into a different future. At last, she nodded slowly. Yes. I'll do it. A smile spread across Martin's face. Good. Then it's settled. You'll start soon. And I promise you, you won't regret it. From that day forward, Alicia's life took a new path. She joined Martin's company, at first in a small role, but her sharp mind and steady work soon caught the attention of others. Martin made sure she had opportunities to learn, to grow, to take on responsibilities she had once only dreamed of. Bit by bit, she rose higher, proving herself again and again. For Martin, the deal became the foundation of his success, but more importantly, it became a story he carried with him always. Whenever people asked how he had managed to turn the tables on those powerful executives, he would smile and say, with a little help from someone most people never noticed. He never told the world the full details, never revealed that it had been a waitress who saved him. That part of the story was his and Alicia's alone. But he honored her in other ways by giving her the chances she deserved, by trusting her judgment, and by reminding his team that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most powerful truths. Years later, when Martin's company had grown into one of the largest in its industry, Alicia sat in a bright office overlooking the city. She was no longer a waitress but a respected professional, guiding decisions and handling numbers that shaped the future of thousands of people. She thought back to the night in the restaurant when she had whispered 5 words that changed everything. That's the wrong formula. Those words had saved Martin, but they had saved her too. They had pulled her out of a life where she was invisible and given her a chance to shine. She knew she had earned her place through hard work, but she also knew that sometimes fate worked in mysterious ways. And so, their story lived on quietly, not in newspapers or headlines, but in the hearts of those who knew them. A story of courage, of second chances, and of how one whisper in a crowded room could change the course of millions.